Somebody gets blown away and the Weasels aren't even in the area. See, the Weasels are still 30 miles away.
By the time our forces stopped going north in 1969, the Weasel's success rate had become impressive.
And we had the best we could determine from photography that we had killed 97 SAM sites. The Wild Weasels had killed 97 SAM sites.
And the loss rate to SAMs had been cut way down. The Weasel mission was a success. There were many heroes, and some could finally be recognized.
My airplane was 301, which is a rather famous weasel bird. Wound up that 4 MiG-17s were shot down by Wild Weasels. All of them were shot down by 301. 27 SAM sites were killed by 301. And it's got more medals hanging on it and everything you ever saw. And the only good part about it is that 301 never got anybody a Purple Heart.
On March 10th, 1967, Captains Merlin H. Dethlefsen and Kevin A. Gilroy, better known as Mike, streaked through a hail of flak to destroy a SAM battery protecting the Thai Nguyen Steelworks. Prior to eliminating the site, they had survived 2 MiG attacks and several anti-aircraft artillery hits on the fuselage of their F-105F Weasel aircraft. But they pressed on with skill and with courage to bring the crippled Thud home to fight again. For conspicuous, extraordinary, and sustained heroism, we hereby award Captain Dethlefsen the Congressional Medal of Honor and Captain Mike Gilroy the Air Force Cross.
On April 19th, 1967, Major Leo K. Thorsness and Captain Harold E. Johnson attacked 2 SAM sites through heavy defensive fire that downed their wingman. They went on to down a MiG, damage another, and then participate in a rescue effort, protecting the rescue aircraft from MiGs. They flew home on fumes. Captain Harold E. Johnson is awarded the Air Force Cross, and the Congressional Medal of Honor is awarded to Major Leo K. Thorsness for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of their lives above and beyond the call of duty.
There were many acts of heroism and many heroes. The Thud Weasels had written their names in the skies over North Vietnam, but the Thuds were getting old, and when we went north again in 1972, the Thud Weasels were accompanied by a new Phantom Weasel, the F-4C. It was first used in Linebacker 2. Linebacker 2 was our last big thrust north, designed to put North Vietnam on its knees. It was December of 1972, and to those who flew the missions, it will always be the 12 days of Christmas.
The strike package we put into the air the first night of Linebacker 2 was awesome. We put everything we could get into the air. We had over 135 B-52s, 200 plus fighters, support package of tankers, EB-66s, EC-121s, everything we could get. It was the biggest guerrilla since World War II.
I can remember that there must have been close to 350 airplanes up there at any one time, and they had to be over the target for an hour and 40 minutes coming in and out of their initial points.
How in the hell do you cover 27 SAM sites for an hour and 40 minutes with 35 Weasels? And that's all we had. The F-4s plus the 2 105 squadrons was 35 total. If anybody had told me in pilot training I'd be going downtown Hanoi at night with 2 bullets to cover 5 SAM sites for 20 minutes, I'd have probably turned in my wings right then. So we did it. We would try to get between the SAM site and the B-52, turn into the site, try to threaten it, make them come up on us instead of the B-52 and take our best shot.
We found that the North Vietnamese had developed some new tactics. One of those tactics was to fire the missile off in the general direction of the airplane, and then at the last minute turn the tracking radar on to provide correction. This was very effective because we couldn't counter it. Also, they brought in new radars that operated outside of our receiver frequency band, and this was very effective too because we just couldn't pick the signals up.
The weather was solid undercast with a full moon. It was like working on a spotlight all night. And the only way you could tell you're over the target was with your inertial nav system, or see the flashes of the bombs going off underneath the clouds, or the flashes of the SAMs as they came up. You could see silhouettes of airplanes at extremely long ranges, and you'd see these ghostly-looking airplanes come by at 500 knots and then disappear into the gloom. And the whole scene just let a unreal, eerie presence to the first couple of days of linebacker 2.
It was very upsetting because our job was to protect the B-52. We were supposed to make sure that they got to their target and got home safely. And because we weren't picking up the signals the way we should have, we would be sitting there and watching the missiles lifting off and tracking on the B-52s and not able to do anything about it. And if you can imagine a SAM missile tracking a B-52 in the middle of the night and burying itself in the bomb bay and watching that huge airplane explode and seeing pieces of the wing and fuselage spinning off into space and realizing that 6 lives were gone just like that.
Will the dawn still arrive? Will I still be alive? Or will I sleep alone here forever?
We changed our tactics again and had the B-52s go after the missile sites, and that combined with the fact that the North Vietnamese just flat ran out of missiles brought them to their knees. The last 5 days, we never had a shot fired at us.
Linebacker 2 was a major success, a team effort that brought the North Vietnamese to the peace table. And despite our difficulty with the new SAM capabilities, the Weasels played a large part in that success.
Throughout linebacker 2, morale was very high. I've never been more proud of being in the United States Air Force. It's hard to describe the bravery, the camaraderie, the threats that these guys faced daily. It was incredible. Some of the most difficult flying you can imagine. The night, the weather, SAMs, MiGs, the constant threat of dying, and yet we lived through it all. We'd come back from missions and gather around the Oak Club and throw about $5 worth of quarters in the jukebox, and we only played one song. The squadron had adopted Roberta Flack's The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. As linebacker 2 progressed, the rallying cry became bring home the POWs. And when the ceasefire finally came, and I remember we were sitting around the television sets watching the POWs walk across the ramp in Hanoi and get on the 141s and lift off. They're free. It was a great emotional release. These same guys that had, on a daily basis, had risked their life so unselfishly and given their utmost to make the mission come off to accomplish what we were trying to do were emotionally drained. You could look around the crowd and they were openly weeping. And to see the prisoners walking across the ramp, that was worth everything we'd done.
The first time ever I saw your face, your face, your face, your
The 6 years that I spent in prison really weren't wasted. I had the opportunity to view communism from the very bowels of a prison system. The guards, in the main, I felt sorry for those people. I pitied them, except for a couple who were professional torturers. They enjoyed mutilating you, it seemed like. One of the things they forced us to do was we had to make a 90-degree bow every time the door opened and closed. And once in a while, you'd get your courage mustered up and you'd have enough in you to refuse to bow just to prove that you still had some pride and some resistance left. You knew it was an automatic beating. You knew you'd bow again in 10 minutes. But this day I decided to do that. The door opened. I looked the guard in the eye, and all of a sudden this fear I had, well, as I waited for the other guards to get there for the beating, was replaced for pity for that man. And I thought, you poor soul. Here you are, the free man, and I'm the prisoner, and yet if you live to be 150 years old, you'll never experience even a tenth of what I did as a free man for 35 years as an American. And by the way, I got my beating. While I was in prison, I learned a lot about myself. I found men who were stronger than I am. I also found men who were weaker than I am. I also learned survival in prison, but that was also part of my being a Wild Weasel pilot. We were doing something as Weasel pilots, as Weasel crews, that had never been done before. There wasn't such a mission.
Home. We are going home. Sand and sun, desert and mountain, our children, our women. This one most beautiful thought underlies all the mundane procedures. A long rumbling scream, gear up, flaps up, we are homeward bound.
The Vietnam War was over, and the country began to regroup. But the Weasels barely took a breath. They knew that Vietnam was only the beginning of a long fight to keep ahead of Soviet SAM technology. And during linebacker, we'd slipped behind. Without the motivation of war, of having to face those SAMs every day, takes real commitment to keep the push on.
We knew what we needed, even back in '66, and Rick Morgan and myself and some other guys wrote a rock, and then we took it from desk to desk, convincing general after general that we really needed this stuff.
You've got to have champions to get things done in the Air Force, and these guys were real fanatics. They were real fanatics because they'd been shot at in combat.
So Systems Command says, you're not giving us any alternative. And we said, you got that right, sweetie. We have to fly this stuff, and we have to take it to combat, and we're not going with anything less.
The lessons learned in combat weren't lost. We'd learned what kind of equipment and tactics worked against the SAMs, and we'd learned that it took a team to make the mission a success. The flyers, the maintenance people, the Air Force engineers, and the contractors. So some of the champions were the people who brought this team together at George Air Force Base and made it work like it did in war.
In wartime, the contractors lived with us. They were there to support us, and there was an overall motivating factor of the guy you were working with may come back the next time because of what you did. And that motivation factor is missing in peacetime. That's what we're trying to foster, and it takes a lot of trust, a lot of work with each other. What we try and do, we live together, we play together, and we drink together, and we make it happen. And that's one of the beauties of the Weasel community, that we make it happen.
And they made it happen. They built a system that some said couldn't be done. It took Mac Air of McDonnell Douglas, who had built the F-4 Phantom, and it took Texas Instruments, IBM, and Loral, all working together to build the APR-38. They used digital processor technology, originally developed by Dalmo Victor, and the BDM Corporation helped the Air Force test and evaluate this new system. Then it took veteran Weasels to make sure it was combat ready. Often they had to be very resourceful.
The original software delivered with the F-4G was based on 4-year-old threat data. In order to update that so we could go to war with it, we needed to bring in a logistics command software engineer. What we did is we shanghaied one of their engineers and brought him out to George so that he could work with us. This guy, Jim Hundley, a little sawed-off runt with bright red hair and a beard, was just what the Weasel needed at that time. And in order to get Jim Hundley more involved in what our problems were, we actually took him up in the airplane and flew with him.
Had one flight in the F-4G, and during that time we were doing a gold key run, and my pilot yelled, "Hit the gold key switch." But the guy was pulling 3 Gs. I couldn't touch the switch, or however many Gs he was pulling. Airbags were going up around me. I just physically couldn't reach my hand up to touch the switch. When I got back, I started changing some of those switch functions and make them just one switch function. There's things like it was a 2-ship mission. The pilot kept saying, "Well, where's number 2?" And I'd look to the left, and I'd look to the right, and I don't see him. He says, "Well, you're supposed to be looking for him. Know where he is. You can't do that and look at the scope at the same time." When we test this stuff on the bench or in the lab, that's all we do is we have this one little set of avionics we play with. We don't worry about making the airplane do what it has to do in the sky. That ride did a lot to say that, hey, there's other things in that back seat to do other than play with your APR-38, Jim Hundley.
Whatever it took to make it work in combat, that's what they did. And whoever it took, they got. They brought in a test team made up of a detachment from the Tactical Air Warfare Center, Air Force engineers, and contractors. They stationed them at George, where they could share planes, maintenance, ideas, and problems with the Weasel squadrons.
Well, there were the battles, and there were the champions. There was a personal commitment by many people in the military and many people in the civilian world. I think this commitment was primarily the challenge of developing a system that couldn't be done.
The APR-38 was the most complex system ever to go in a fighter. It was a radar warning and homing receiver that could locate and identify enemy systems from great distances and with astonishing accuracy. It would then tell the missiles exactly where to go.
The crews would come back from missions with stories about how quickly they could, with just the push of a few buttons, designate an enemy radar system, hand that information off, or electronically talk to the missiles that we were carrying, and then complete an attack on that system in a matter of a few seconds.
This was the core of the new advanced Wild Weasel, the Weasel of the future. Since it was software-based, it could constantly be updated to meet new threats, whatever new types of radar emitters the Soviets could devise. And it could be interfaced with many new software-controlled systems, like the new high-speed anti-radiation missile, the HARM.
We've always had an exceptional system in the APR-38. Its receiver has the capability of seeing targets at very long distances and plotting them very accurately. The only problem in the past was we always had to get in very close to the enemy in order to utilize our missiles. Now, when we bring in the capability of the HARM, which is a long-range missile, we now have a system that can shoot at the enemy outside of the enemy radar's range.
We went from a Colt Saturday Night Special to a Magnum, and it's proven out. If we can attack from outside lethal range, we're not forced, like we were in Southeast Asia, to end up strafing SAM sites or getting in there with a Shrike eyeball to eyeball.
So this new capability opened up all sorts of new tactical possibilities.
The big benefit that we have at George is that we can interface between the test team and the operational squadron to develop a baseline for the best tactics.
The TALK Det 5 people operate right out of my squadron. You know, they fly out of my squadron. They get their jets from my duty desk. Their maintenance is my maintenance. We sit down and talk about things over coffee at the coffee bar continually, and then move on down to the bar after work and talk about things there. This capability, that capability. One of those. You know what we really need is, and you lay something out and you can see the wheels start turning on. Next thing you know, that's incorporated in some form.
We focus on the current day threat, what's really going on in the world. We have to be ready at any time to deploy and to go to war. So when the threat changes or when new tactics are required, we, in fact, develop those.
And the reason that interchange between development, testing, and tactics is so important is that weaseling is still a very unique mission.
Whereas strike aircraft or attack aircraft have a known target, one thing that they're supposed to do when they take off, they know that before they ever go to their airplane. The Wild Weasel doesn't know that. He has to look all over the battle area. He has to detect threats, collate intelligence information that he has available to him in the airplane, real time, select what he feels are the priority targets, and then suppress or destroy those targets based on his own decision process and his own available information from the APR-38. It takes very special equipment and very special people. That's why we demand the best, we've got to have the best, and we get the best.
Well, I'd rather be an F4 jock than the Air Force Chief of Staff. One good reason I ain't got the rank right here, you're supposed to laugh. It's a lot more fun just dropping bombs and hassling 2-on-2. So I'll just stick to my gunnery range and fly in the Phantom 2.
I'm a part of a very special and limited force. I kind of like to think that I've got a bounty on my head as far as the Soviets go, because we are a force that they don't have.
With one aircraft and one aircrew, I can do more to disrupt the enemy than probably a lot of other aircraft.
We know our equipment very well. We know the threat extremely well, and therefore we feel very confident as we do our work.
Just make me an F4 jock.
We do get some of the most experienced pilots and backseaters, EWOs, into the Weasel squadrons, but most of them haven't had combat experience, and that does make a big difference.
When you get shot at, you get a whole new perspective. It's like a veil's been lifted from your eyes, and you can see everything very clearly. We're trying to make our current training as much like combat as possible. We try to impress upon our people that if they don't do things exactly right, then somebody can get killed.
Simulators give crews practice against complex threats you can't set up on a range. So Singer Link developed a simulator that provides realistic threat scenarios, the types the Weasels would actually see in Eastern Europe, and they keep it current with the airplane. Regular sorties at George give the crews range experience.
But you don't operate the Weasel in a vacuum. You know, it's part of an Air Force team. Our tactics have to be integrated with other Air Force tactics. And that really is the job of Red Flag and Green Flag.
Red Flag and Green Flag are coordinated exercises developed to simulate combat as closely as possible. They bring together all the various elements of the Air Force: reconnaissance, intelligence, jamming, defense suppression, the CAP, and the attack force. And they're all integrated into realistic missions against a real live opponent, Air Force specialists trained in Soviet tactics. It's real, it's dynamic. Combat decisions are made every moment.
It's almost like in Southeast Asia, where you've got an enemy on the ground, you've got an enemy in the air, and they're really good, and they're out to get you.
But he knows what it's like in Southeast Asia. Obviously, I wasn't there, so I don't have that benefit. But you get a feel for it first time you get up on the tanker. You can tell then that you're part of a bigger package. That all this thing you've talked about, things you've trained for all the time, you have a responsibility there. You start to listen.
Listen to the radios. Who's there, who isn't there? How is it going to change my plan? You've got to be on top of everything mentally. You've got to know where you are. You've got to know where the ground is. You've got to know where all of the other players are in order to do it. And while you're doing this, all the mental gyrations that you're going through to keep everything in track, you're also under a lot of physical strain. You're pulling 4 and 5 Gs. Sometimes, you know, the sweat, or more. Sometimes the sweat is so bad on a hot day out there that on my glasses, it's like looking through a wet windshield, and yet you've got to press on because you're already dodging MiGs or SAMs, and you're doing all this, and then bang, the next thing you know, geez, you're in the target area.
There's more people starting to talk on the radio. It's a little more confusing. Who's talking to who really said what? Did they mean that?
You've got to make an attack of some sort or another. I'm looking in the airplane, I'm looking back outside, I come back in, I designate a target, I tell John what target I've got designated, I'm back out the other side. He's checking his switches.
Checking switches, finding out where the wingman is, listening to where the guys are that we're supposed to be supporting, listening for code words. Put all of those together and you say, well, have I got the right target? Have I got the right switches? I'm in the right place. Do I have the right time?
The machine's giving me the information I need. And boom, John, come hard left, pull 30, and we're in our attack. And the next thing I hear from him, you know, is
shotgun. You come back and you feel good. You're tired, but it's a good, tired feeling. And you know that because of this, that if you had to, you could go to combat and you're ready.
In fact, that's the whole concept behind Red Flag. We found after the war in Southeast Asia that most of the guys that got shot down in their first 10 missions or so. So what we're trying to do at Red Flag is to give them the intense training that they need to get over that 10-mission hump, to make the mistakes that they would normally make in those first 10 missions, make them at Nellis, don't make them in combat.
Sing the Red River Rats battle hymn. Hold your head high, stand tall, you are men. Never run from a fight, be prepared day and night. Sing the Red River Rats battle hymn.
The Wild Weasel mission began in crisis, a response to a new type of warfare that continues to challenge us now and will as far as we can see into the future. The Weasel community has devoted the post-war years to developing one of the most sophisticated weapon systems in the U.S. military inventory, and air crews better trained than ever before. But is it enough? Some people say we can't keep up with a country that pours twice as much as we do into developing its weapon systems. Intelligence experts estimate that there are about 10,000 SAM launchers at over 900 sites, including many new generations of SAMs we've never encountered.
Well, the threat in Central Europe is awesome. There's no doubt about that. But can we meet it? Yes. There's a lot of people in the Washington area especially that enjoy drawing pictures of this magnificent red line of the communist nations and put one Wild Weasel airplane every 30 miles along that line, and they like to point out we've only got 100 and so many Wild Weasels. How can we possibly cover all that area? But that's not how we employ weasels in the first place. You don't try to take on the entire enemy all at once, all up and down the line. Our primary job is really to suppress or to knock holes through specific areas in this big red line that they draw so that the attack airplanes can go do their job. So we would mass our force to actually do that. Is it a lethal job? Will it be dangerous? Yes. Will we be exposed to a lot of things? Yes. Can we do the job? You betcha.
Today's wars are fought on the technological front. It's a real cat and mouse game between ourselves and the Russians. We're going to have to improve our APR-38 because of some changes that the Russians have made in their equipment. We're going to do that through a performance update program, what we call a PUP. There are two things that PUP program is going to do for us. It's going to give us a new computer, and it's also going to give us a directional receiver group. The enhancements of those two items in the APR-38 is going to give us the capability to process the new exotic emitters that the Russians keep throwing at us.
Now, once you have this technology, then I think you have to look at the airframe you put it into. Now, presently, the F-4G is doing just a super job, but it's an airplane that's been around for a long time, and if you look at the other aircraft that are going to be the main strikers, it might be better if we had a better match.
And then either the F-16E or the F-15E, and I would assume that we'll look very hard at those two airplanes. Beyond that, of course, we've got some other advanced technologies that we're looking at up at Wright-Patterson right now.
For instance, there are threats today that we're continuing to address and work on. Examples would be the IR threat, the millimeter wave threat, electro-optic threat, and any other threats they may come up with.
We're continuing to broaden the base of the defense suppression program. We brought the EF-111 jamming aircraft on board. Our tactical fighters are carrying a lot more electronic combat equipment than they used to carry. They have jamming pods, passive warning receivers, chaff and flare dispensers.
One of the ways that we in industry are looking at helping the Weasel meet the threat of the future is to take some of the technology that we developed, the APR-38 for instance, take its receiver technology and integrate it into the fighter of the future to give the guy that's flying a better chance to locate the threat that's trying to kill him. Also, when he meets that SAM eyeball to eyeball, we need to give him something to protect himself with, and a form of an anti-radiation missile like the HARM missile, only in a much smaller package with a much more simple concept, might give him the capability of fighting his way out of that problem and surviving to go on to his target.
But all that having been said, the Wild Weasel aircraft and the Wild Weasel aircrew are going to remain, at least for the foreseeable future, our #1 defense suppression asset and our #1 radar killer.
It takes a unique blend of flying skill and intelligence to be able to do that mission well. And I feel confident that we're putting out those kinds of crews who can do just that.
To duel with the SAMs, it's incredible, the feeling that you get and the responsibility that you have. But we go in there and we do the job well. Today, and it will be in the future, it's one hell of a mission.
The Weasel's mission is first in, last out.
Tales that I can tell, oh Lord, what it's like down in the hell, oh Lord. I got tales that I can tell, I got tales that I can tell, oh Lord. I know what it's like to sit and wait, I know misery of unknown fate, don't know whether I'll come back today. I got tales that I can tell, oh Lord, oh Lord. I feel loneliness and fear and pain. I've seen brave and daring deeds insane. I've seen blood flow but not in vain. I got tales that I can tell, oh Lord, oh Lord. I've seen fire and thunder in the sky. I've known Men who weren't afraid to die, I've seen. Men take eagle's wings and fly. I got tales that I can tell